I'm going to turn this over to Ashley Bargenquast, the section leader of our criminal law section, and she will do the introductions.
Thank you, Anne. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ashley, president of the criminal law section, as you all know, and I have the pleasure and honor today of introducing you all to Chris Lamb. Chris is personally one of my first legal mentors, a mock trial coach from law school, as well as just an exquisite role model of mine. She is a public defender in San Francisco on the felony trial team. She was admitted to practice in 1996 and graduated from the University of San Diego School of Law. She received her criminal law specialization certificate from the California State Bar after that and has practiced indigent defense since becoming a lawyer. Among some of her extra work activities are being president of the California Attorneys for Criminal Justice in 2017, coaching, as I mentioned, the UC Davis mock trial team and inspiring countless attorneys that are now practicing, and of course, working as an adjunct professor of law at UNC in Northern California. So in 2009, she graduated from the National Criminal Defense College in Macon, Georgia, and she has tried many cases to verdict. Today, she's going to teach us about some advanced cross-examination of officers, and I am so excited that she is here. Take it away.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Today, I would like to introduce Officer Kelsey Ryburn. Kelsey's pronouns today, as you can see from her mustache, are they, them. Or for the people in the new they, them is Z. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about basic cross-examination of a police officer, the method that probably all of you learned, and I call it Cross 101. In Cross 101, we were taught to marry a police officer to his police report, and I'll demonstrate that in just a second. What I put in my materials is a link to where you can download all of the learning domains that a peace officer in California must take and pass if he is going to be a peace officer in California. And there are the post-learning domains are 1 through 43, and they're available at a website that I put in my materials. And I urge all of you to go to the Academy. You can get through all 43 learning domains in a few hours, and there's some priceless stuff in there. For instance, did you know that police officers are taught that they are that the Americans with Disabilities Act applies to them, and that if they suspect that somebody has either cognitive or mental health disabilities, they are supposed to take that into account and conform their behavior accordingly. There's also learning domains on writing reports and just about everything else. I also gave you the website where you can go on and watch a lot of their training videos and other training materials that are out there for police officers. Okay. Cross 101. We are taught on cross, the first thing you say is, officer, you wrote a report in this case, correct?
Yes.
I'm handing you pages 1 through 10. Can you please take a look at them?
My report.
Okay, and is that the entirety of your report?
Seems that way.
It appears complete?
Yeah.
And it's an accurate copy?
Appears so, yeah.
Okay. Now, in the police academy, one of the more important learning domains that you had to take and pass to become a peace officer was on writing reports, correct?
Academy 101.
And specifically, it was learning domain 18.
Yes.
You studied that learning domain?
Doesn't come to mind as of right now, but I believe so. It's part of the standard course curriculum.
And you had to pass all of the learning domains in order to become a peace officer, correct? And you did that.
Yes, I did.
And in the academy, you were taught to make your reports thorough.
Yeah.
And accurate.
Yeah. And
complete.
See, the best as we can, but yeah, for the most part.
But that's what you were taught in the academy.
Yes, that's what we learned in the academy.
And you had no problem understanding that domain, right?
Right.
And you were able to demonstrate that you could comply with that learning domain in order to become a peace officer, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And one of the reasons that you are taught to make your police reports thorough, accurate, and complete is because you were taught that police reports are relied on by prosecutors in making charging decisions, correct?
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, you're aware that often trials occur months, if not years, after the fact, right?
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, police officers rely on their own reports to refresh their memories before they testify, right?
Yep.
And you were taught all of these things in the academy.
Yeah.
An officer, in this case, you made your police report thorough, accurate, and complete, right?
Yes.
And you reviewed that report before you came in here today.
I did.
And you didn't find any corrections or changes that you need to make.
That's all in there.
It's thorough, accurate, and complete.
Yep.
Okay. That is Police Officer 101, marrying them to their report. Now, I am not saying don't do this. I am saying it is, do this at the preliminary hearing. And usually, if your police officer is a rookie, at a trial, he's going to come along with you. However, let me now demonstrate what a really experienced officer, particularly an experienced officer in a larger metropolitan area or city, how they can wiggle off Cross 101 because they've seen it 1,000 times. Okay. Officer Ryburn, good morning, good afternoon.
Good.
How long have you been on the San Francisco Police Department?
20 years.
Long time.
Yeah.
And in order to become a police officer, you had to take the post learning domains 1 through 43 in order to pass the academy, correct?
20 years ago, yeah.
And in one of those learning domains, you were taught to write police reports.
Teacher at the academy, yeah,
And you took that learning domain
20 years ago,
and you passed it.
20 years ago.
Now, you wrote a report in this instance.
Yes.
I am handing you pages 1 through 10 of your report. Could you take a moment and look over them? Does that appear to be your report?
Appears to be.
Does it appear to be a full copy of your report?
Looks like it's mostly there. Yeah.
Now, when you went to the academy and learned report writing, you learned to make your reports thorough, correct?
Academy 101.
And you learned to make them complete.
Best your ability.
Okay, and you learned to fully document witness statements.
Well, I mean, you know, the police report is really it's a tool to help kind of summarize what we're out there experiencing. You know, the academy can teach you one thing. The academy can't teach you what it's really like there on the street. So report's kind of a summary.
Okay, now, this report that you wrote, did you make it thorough, accurate, and complete?
I mean, it's got, you know, it's got, you know, most of my observations in there, but it can't capture everything that happens out there. That's why we have body worn camera footage. You know, as I say in my report, you know, this is, you know, to my best of my ability to summarize the big ones.
Okay, so an experienced officer can kind of wiggle off the normal marrying to the report by saying things like the report is a summary, or the statements aren't verbatim, it says it's a summary, etc. I even had an officer here in San Francisco at the prelim where I was trying to marry him to his report, state that he actually didn't believe that reports had to be thorough, accurate, and complete. That's what his testimony was for. Okay, so like I said, a rookie cop is probably going to come along with you. And I do recommend marrying an officer to the report at the preliminary hearing, particularly asking them, you've reviewed it before you came in today, take a moment, is there anything you need to correct? Is there anything that's missing? And do that at the prelim. Okay, so the Carmen Miranda version of cross, I use at trial. You're going to need some props. As you can see, I'm a big believer in props. On Amazon for $8, you can get Mr. Sketch's scented markers. Don't ask me why, but I guarantee you, jurors sit up and take notice when you have scented markers. I don't know why, but they're fascinated. So you're going to have your little 8 scented markers. You can also get a pack of 12. And what you're going to do is you're going to start out, and this officer is going to think that you're on the normal cross-examination 101 highway. And like Officer Ryburn showed you, they know how to veer off that highway or answer in a way that doesn't really pin them down. For those of you who practice criminal law, you've seen this kind of officer, the kind of officer who answers a simple yes or no question with a, well, yes and no. And you're going to make them think that you're going down 101, and then you are going to take an exit that they've never seen. Okay.
Before we begin, I'm removing the mustache because I'm having a chemical reaction. All right, I'm ready.
Here we go. Good afternoon, Officer Ryburn.
Good afternoon.
You wrote a report in this matter,
I did.
and I am handing you a copy of your report. Could you take a moment and look that over?
My report.
And does that appear to be a full copy of your report?
Yeah, the initial one. Yeah.
Well, nothing's missing from your report.
That's the one I wrote the day of. Yeah.
Okay. Now, in the academy, you learned how to write reports, right?
20 years ago.
And they have an entire learning domain on writing reports, learning domain 18.
Yeah, it's the beginners, you know, right when you're green and wet under the collar.
And in the academy, you'd agree that in the academy, they teach you to make your reports complete.
Yeah.
And thorough.
Yeah, I mean, it's the academy. It's a classroom setting. It's not the real world.
Okay, but you'd agree that's what they teach you in the academy.
Yeah, they try to present it to you in the classroom setting.
And they teach you to make your reports thorough.
I mean, yeah, again, it's one thing to be a kid in the classroom. It's another thing to be out there on the beat, you know, living the real cop life.
I'm glad you said that, officer. What I'm hearing from you is that I think you'd agree, based on your statements, that an awful lot of police work you learn on the job, right?
That's fair.
You learn it by hitting the mean streets, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of what you learn about interviewing witnesses, you learn on the job by hitting the mean streets, by actually having interviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of people in your 20-year career.
Yeah, I mean, until you talk to people, until you've been lied to your face, you really just, you don't know.
And in the real world, like you are saying, you learn after interviewing thousands of people, you learn some red flags that are often indicators of someone who is not being truthful with you. You agree?
Yeah. You get a good sense.
Well, one of those red flags that you've learned by actually doing it, by actually hitting the mean streets and interviewing thousands of witnesses, you'd agree that one of the biggest red flags of when someone may not be telling you the truth is when the facts of their story change. You agree that's a big red flag, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can't keep their story straight.
And another big red flag that you've learned in the real world by doing actual policing, by hitting the mean streets and interviewing thousands of witnesses and victims. Another red flag you've learned that is often an indicator of somebody who is not being truthful with you is somebody who omits facts that you think were important, right?
That's fair. That's fair.
Okay.
You're editing.
And in the real world, in your 20 years of policing, interviewing thousands of witnesses and victims and going to thousands of crime scenes and seeing people under all kinds of different conditions, you've learned that sometimes you can learn a lot by the witnesses or the victim's demeanor, correct?
Yeah.
And you've learned in interviewing thousands of suspects that when you catch them in a lie and you confront them, or you catch them in an omission and you confront them, often you can see their discomfort in their demeanor, right?
It's fair to say. Yeah.
Sometimes they'll start fidgeting or looking away, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll actually blush, right?
Sometimes.
But you've learned in the real world, those are big indicators that someone may not be telling you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, right?
Yeah.
Now, another thing that you've learned on the job in your 20 years of actual policing, you've learned that it's also a big red flag. Someone who may not be being truthful with you is when someone gives you facts that are inconsistent with each other, right?
Yeah. Kind of goes back to stories not straight. Some of the things aren't lining up.
Right. Some of the things don't line up. That's a big indicator of somebody who's not telling you the truth, right? And in your 20 years of hitting the mean streets, interviewing thousands of witnesses and suspects and victims and innocent and not so innocent bystanders, you've learned that you need to know if somebody has a motive to lie to you, right?
It's pretty helpful. Yes.
And that's one of the things that you look at, right?
Yes. Do they have a reason? Something to incentivize them to not give me the whole story.
Now, connected to that, but a little bit different, is bias. You've learned by actually policing, by interviewing thousands and thousands of people, you've learned that some of the people you interview have a particular bias, right?
Oh, I don't know what you mean by bias.
Okay, well, let's say you interview someone and it becomes really clear that they want, maybe it's not the victim, but it's a bystander. It makes really clear from their language that they want Mr. Smith here to fry for a petty crime. If somebody says something like that, that's an indicator that they have a particular bias about the criminal justice system, right?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes people, like you say, sometimes they got kind of some skin in the game, and sometimes it's related to the case, and sometimes people, a lot of looky-loos who want to come in and start trying to tell you who you should prosecute, who you should, and they will say some really outrageous stuff.
Okay, but when you figure out somebody, as you say, has some skin in the game, you need to filter that out to be a good police officer. You'd agree with that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, you take that information down, but you take it with a grain of salt.
Okay, great. All right, officer. You've reviewed or you've gone over and said that that is a full and complete copy of the report that you wrote in this case.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Now, on direct examination, you stated that Mr. Smith was wearing a large, puffy red jacket. Do you remember testifying to that here in court today?
I do.
Now, officer, I am handing you this lemon-scented marker. And I would like you to turn to page 5, paragraph 2 of your report. And I would like you to highlight the following statement in your report. Mr. Smith was wearing a large, puffy, black jacket. Can you highlight that for me?
Yes.
Thank you. The jury's over there. Changed facts. I'm going to put my lemon scented marker in my little basket here. Now, officer, I noticed that you were reviewing your police report in the hallway before testimony today. And you were reviewing it to refresh your memory, right?
Yeah.
And you've already testified on direct, and you were on the witness stand for an hour, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And you knew that Mr. Prosecutor here today would be asking you essentially to tell this jury all of the relevant facts that you found in your investigation. You knew that, right?
You told me to come in here and tell it.
Well, you knew that this prosecutor would want you to tell all of the relevant facts in your investigation, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I am handing you this orange scented highlighter, and take all the time that you need. I would like you to highlight in your report where another man who was detained that night in the area of the incident, who was about Mr. Smith's height and age, was wearing a large, puffy red jacket. Just take a moment, go all the way through. When you have found that information, please highlight it for me. I didn't see you highlight anything.
It's not in there.
It's not in there. Omission. I'd also like the record to reflect that Officer Ryburn appears to be blushing. Demeanor. Now, can I have my marker back? Thank you. Now, officer, on direct, you testified that the call came out at 10:20, right?
Yes.
And you also testified that Mr. Smith was detained at 10:18. I heard you testify to that, right?
I don't recall.
Well, I do. You testified that dispatch sent out the call at 10:20. And then later on in your testimony, you testified that Mr. Smith was detained at 10:18. So I am going to take my little marker here and I am going to write just right up here, 10:18 on your report. This is my lime scented marker. Thank you. Now, you testified that you learned a lot about policing on the job.
Yeah.
And you made a lot of comments about, well, that was basic training. That was police work 101.
Yes.
And it sounded like you believe that in actual experience, you've learned that the basic academy is just the basics.
Yes.
Now, you testified, and you stated that you learned on the job that people often have biases, and those biases may be a reason that you should, what did you say? Take their testimony with a grain of salt. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay. Now, one of the ways that you can spot bias is if somebody comes into the game, into the situation, having already made up their mind, right?
It's one way.
That's one way. That's it. That shows bias. You'd agree?
Yes.
Now, you wrote in your report, and you testified here today, that you are familiar with Mr. Smith, right?
Yes.
Now, I am going to give you this blueberry scented marker, and I would like you to turn to page 1 of the narrative of your report and paragraph 3. Now, paragraph 3 is pretty much at the beginning of the narrative of your report, correct?
Yes.
And in that very beginning of the report, you started out your report by saying that you came onto the scene, right?
Yes.
And you traveled around a couple blocks looking for the perpetrator, right?
Yes.
And you immediately saw Mr. Smith about a half a block away, right?
Yes.
And can you highlight the portion of your report where you wrote, I am familiar with Mr. Smith and his background and criminal history. So I knew right away that Mr. Smith was involved.
It's not in there. I wouldn't write something that it is not. It is in there.
And right below that, you wrote that you were certain of Mr. Smith's guilt. And that was before you had even looked in the general area or found or looked for anybody who was wearing a large puffy red jacket, correct?
Yes.
Bias. Now, you're aware, aren't you, officer, that Mr. Smith had previously filed a complaint against you in another case, correct?
I was alerted to that.
And I'm sure that you disagreed with that.
Hi, everyone's entitled to their opinion, but yeah, I disagree with it.
Now, when someone files a complaint, it goes in your personnel file, right?
Yes.
And that can affect whether or not you get promoted, right?
Yes.
And that can affect your standing in the agency that you work with, right?
Yes.
Now, I'm giving you this cherry scented marker. Just look over your report and highlight where you wrote, where you alerted everyone to the fact that Mr. Smith had previously filed a complaint against you.
I didn't put that in the report.
Motive to lie. Okay. So basically, you can do this with a whole host of areas. Depends on which ones are in your case. But almost always you're going to have omissions. You're going to have changed facts, or sorry, added facts by the police officer. And there's always a bias. There are different ways to bring out bias. One that just by being on the police force, they end up seeing things in with a particular skew. So how you bring this all together in closing is you get in front of the jury and you now have your whole basket of fruit, all of your different scented markers. And I usually have a picture of Carmen Miranda on my PowerPoint in the background. And then you can say, look, I'm not saying that Officer Ryburn was a liar or biased or incomplete or sloppy. You want to use whatever language fits the officer that you were cross-examining. Sometimes they're just, they come across as nice guys, but completely inaccurate. So you would use inaccurate or lacks, wasn't thorough. Or if they come across not wanting to answer the question and really evading and giving you, saying yes and no for a simple yes or no question, go ahead and use stronger language. Like, I'm not saying that Officer Ryburn was a liar. You have your little basket of fruit and Carmen Miranda in the background. You say, nope, I'm not saying that because I don't have to. Officer Ryburn is the one who told you that. And then you can bring out each one of your fruits one at a time and remind them that it was Officer Ryburn who told you that in the real world, one of the big red flags that you pick up on when somebody is lying to you is when they omit facts. Now you guys know that as well. And then you just go through each one of your basket of fruit and then stress again. Nope, I don't have to tell you that Officer Ryburn was not being straight with you, was not giving you the full, complete truth because Officer Ryburn told you that. You can take Carmen Miranda off. Where you at?
I believe it's down, and I want to give you a round of applause for this
Wait,
one.
no, I've got a couple more. No, I'm not done.
Okay.
I've got, what, 10 minutes? You there?
You do indeed have about 12 minutes left and however much time you want for questions and answers.
Okay, so another new and kind of cool area that you can use to cross-examine police officers is with Penal Code 859.7. It went into effect of January 1st of this year, and it has some pretty strong mandatory language about how officers must do six-pack showing on ID cases. It doesn't preclude them from doing cold shows. That's a problem. But if your officer either does a lineup or does a six-pack photograph for a witness to identify someone, you now have some really powerful ways to cross-examine them. 859.7 makes it mandatory for every single police agency in the state to come up with best practices that at a minimum must include every single point in 859.7, and that is that all photo lineups or cold shows, not cold shows, all photo lineups or actual lineups must be video recorded. And if they are not video recorded, it must explain why it could not be done. And there's really, I can't think of any way that there would be an adequate reason why someone couldn't record something, because all officers are given phones that have video recording ability. And often, if not most often, when photo ID lineups are given, they're given at the police station. And almost all police stations have a little interview room with video cameras. I actually had this incident really recently in one of my preliminary hearings, and the sergeant and the other officer who testified, I started out by asking them, had they received any training since January 1st of this year on how to conduct photo lineups, and they hadn't. I asked them if they had complied with their agency's policies on how to give photo lineups, and both of them stated that they had. Well, nowhere in the report did it say that it wasn't videotaped. I also asked them if it said that it was given at 850 Bryant, therefore there was video equipment available. They agreed to that. So in the report, it didn't say that the reasons that it wasn't videotaped. It wasn't videotaped. Almost every single mandatory provision in 859.7 had been violated. And what that told me was, even though this section, which was passed in order to make eyewitness identification more reliable, what that told me is that if the San Francisco Police Department has not complied with it, which it was clear that they hadn't, then probably a lot of other agencies around the state are blowing it off as well. At the end of 859.7, it does state that nothing in the statute makes otherwise reliable evidence inadmissible. So some people may look at that and think, well, you know, it's nice mandatory provision without a remedy, but I choose not to see it that way, because there's always the argument that can be presented was that the statute itself says what must be done for the evidence to be reliable, and it's mandatory, and therefore this ID, where every provision of 859.7 was violated, isn't reliable. So anyway, it's worth seeing what kind of action we can get out of that one. Anyway, thank you very much. And I really like to give a big hand to Officer Ryburn, who is in the middle of a long preliminary hearing.
Thank you so much, officer, for your lunch break, taking a trip to the other side of the witness stand, if you would. And thank you so much, Chris. I wish that everybody could give you a big hand of applause. It's just me and Ann here, but thank you so much. I know that I love that, and too many times have had officers wiggle out by saying like, oh, well, you can't include everything. There's so much that you don't realize until you're on the stand months later testifying about it. So I really appreciate that. I haven't seen any questions pop up in our chat, but I know it came to mind with me. Do you admit that piece, like the notes into evidence at all, or do you just use it as the prop there and not worry about getting it into evidence?
You mean the police report where he's highlighted or hasn't highlighted?
Yeah, do you try and put that in as an exhibit?
No, what I do is I just take it from him and at the end, and I should have done that. And then when I'm going through my blueberry marker, which, was whatever, inconsistent facts, I'll hold up the police report and say, it wasn't in here. So I go through each one of the incidents where the police officer agreed that that's an indicator that somebody's not being straight with you. It's a red flag. So the bottom line is it's just another way to come at it that an officer doesn't see coming. And you don't, in using this method in front of a jury, you don't want to ask that 1-2 question too many of like, you made your report accurate, complete, and whatever, because it gives them that opportunity. You just want to kind of act like you're going there and then veer off and saying, and they're never going to disagree with you when you say, you really learned real policing by doing it, by being on these mean streets, by, and they're always going to agree with that.
Okay. Have you ever had it, the line of questioning objected to effectively, like kept out, being called argumentative while you're doing it or anything like that?
No, after the officer exhibits like omissions or change facts, when I go and say omissions, I inflect as if it's a question. And so no, I haven't. And I have had the wonderful experience of having an officer here in San Francisco, literally when I was approaching with another scented marker, put his head in his hands and said, no, not the scented marker. So that was too fun.
I use this technique in a second DUI with a 0.18 blood alcohol level when I was in the misdemeanors. And I brought my bright pink highlighter for the super macho cop. And all the jurors said, when we talked aside, they're like, well, when it wasn't in there and we had the bright pink highlighters and all those facts weren't highlighted in pink, we knew it was wrong. And the cop, just the expression of this, no neck, just hulked out, having to take my little tiny highlighter and sit there. It was wonderful. It is a very good checking an officer move, also just for psychological warfare.
Okay. I don't see any other questions from anyone. Oh, someone says that they were waiting for the cop to sniff and just accidentally leave a mark on their nose.
Well, I honestly use the scented markers because I'm telling you, try them. Jurors are fascinated and they will sit up and they're all in for scented markers, and half of them will say, where did you get those?
We'll be sure to include a link to find those in the materials. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Chris, and thank you so much, Kelsey, for being the officer. I wish I could have everybody give you another round of applause, but we will be sharing all of those materials with everyone at the close of this after we're all finished.
Thank you. I did in my materials, it was for a different seminar I gave on cross. There's more info about just general cross, but the website for the learning domains is unnecessary. Always go through the learning domains and have them at your hand, because you can print them out in their entirety for whatever issue you have. There's always going to be report writing, but there's one on drugs, there's one on search and seizure. There's everyone. Have those available, because there's priceless stuff in there.
Thank you very much, Crystal. That was great. Thank you, officer. And thank you, Ashley, for making this happen. the materials will go out quickly, and this recording should be available at some point in the future. So near future. So thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.